Hey everyone, it's Damien, aka Sleepy Reader, and I am here to enter a contest. This one is from Four Color Commentary, one of my new favorite channels, and he's doing I think it's a approaching 200 subscribers contest, so I hope he gets a lot more subscribers and a lot more viewers. Frog in my throat, let's have some coffee. And he asked for kind of a comic book origin story. And boy, did I do a lot of those in the early days of my channel. But I guess I haven't done one in a long time. Maybe I'll make a playlist eventually and link it down below of other ones I've done. So I thought I'd take a slightly different approach and not just talk about my first comic book or two, but a whole series of comic books in my, let's say, first 10 years of comic book reading that each was a step in solidifying my obsession with comic books. Although, believe me, I was pretty darn obsessed starting with my very first comic. So I'm going to turn the camera around and show a bunch of comics and make comments about them as it pops into mind. And if you haven't already, I'll definitely link below Four Color Commentary. Definitely check out Mark's channel. I think it's well worth watching. All right, this is Avengers 93, the very first comic as far as my memories, which I now have come to doubt a little bit. I'm going to take it out of the plastic, out of the Mylar. As far as my memories tell me, this was my very first comic and a very exciting moment for me. This is not the original copy, unfortunately. That was bought from me by a dealer when I was 16. But anyway, we were on vacation. I just turned 10 years old. It would be the summer, probably late summer of 1971. And we were on a summer holiday in Vermont. And we were at a drugstore that also had a diner in it. We were having hamburgers and milkshakes there. And I saw the spinner rack and I was entranced. And my parents said, well, comic books are not very good for you, but we'll let you get just one. So my memory is I spent ages spinning and spinning that rack trying to decide which to get. I'd never read a comic book before, but I did know, I think I knew who Captain America and Iron Man and maybe the Fantastic Four were beforehand from those 60s Marvel cartoons, which I'd seen, I think, in reruns when I visited my grandmother in New York City, where they had more TV channels than we did in central Connecticut. But one of the things I remember is it was so hard to choose. I think there was a Superman book that tempted me. There was also a Conan book. Here's this kind of random cover that I found from a reprint of the original Conan. Somewhere I have the original Conan, but wasn't able to dig everything up that I wanted to find. But I distinctly remember being very tempted by this Conan cover. And later on the vacation, I would play at being Conan, even though all I had to go on it at the point was this cover, I think. Or maybe I flipped through the insides a little bit. But in the end, I decided to get the Avengers because it had the most superheroes on the cover. And boy, did I know how to pick them, because this thing has some of the best Neil Adams art I've ever seen. And it's during Neil Adams' brief time at Marvel. He did some awesome stuff on the X-Men. He did some Avengers. He did some Inhumans. And all of it was great. I think the stuff on the X-Men was particularly good. But I think this issue is a real standout, in part because of this sequence where Ant-Man, Hank Pym, goes inside the Vision to repair him. And it's so inventive and visually grabbing, visually stunning. Looks really good on these newsprint pages, actually, which is kind of surprising given how detailed his work was. And I think I was just hooked from that point on. I loved everything about this comic. Well, maybe not the Retire Before I'm 50 ad. But man, oh man, did this plunge me into so many wild science fiction ideas, between the going inside an android's body, the concept of an android, of course the concept of all these superheroes, and intangibility and all of that. And then the colorful costumes and the muscles. I was very into the muscles at the time. And of course you can see how beautiful the artwork was. So I assume I would be addicted even if I picked up some other comic book first, but this was certainly a great choice. And well, my memory tells me I almost immediately started trying to copy drawings from it in here. I think the very first thing I tried to draw was this Skrull here, because it seemed doable. It seemed not too hard. But I don't trust my memories that much anymore, so it may have been at some other point that I started drawing obsessively, not instantly upon buying this. But I think I must have, on the rest of the vacation, spent a lot of time looking over this, trying to figure it all out, because it obviously implied, so many heroes, so much history going on. This is the beginning of the Kree-Skrull War, so we've got the Krees and the Skrulls, plus all these other concepts that my young, just barely 10-year-old brain was trying to absorb. I think I may have started reading science fiction very shortly after discovering this book. I hadn't discovered science fiction yet, to my memory. I'm just not sure. Somewhere around 10 or 11, I started picking up science fiction books too. So it all kind of happened around the same time. And I think because of that, seeing Conan, I don't know if I got into Conan in comics first or in the original books by Robert E. Howard, the short story collections, which were all the rage at the time with the Frank Frazetta covers. But I'm guessing after seeing this Conan cover, I probably found a Conan book before actually getting to read a Conan comic, but I'm totally not sure. Then the next comic that I bought, according to my memory, was this Captain America and the Falcon, and I seem to just keep grabbing it when I see it at comic book stores. I don't think I have my original copy. So I loved this one just as much. It's not Neil Adams, it's Sal Buscema. Oh, there's still tape on this first. Okay. And it also, was a deep plunge into a weird, fantastic world, but it also had this street level stuff with the Falcon. That's a beautiful, beautiful splash page. The rest of the issue is not as flashy and amazing as the Neil Adams, but it still was very cool, and introduced the idea of S.H.I.E.L.D. and Sharon Carter and Falcon and Captain America working with the cops and perhaps some not very pleasant cops involved, and then Batroc the Leaper, who I thought was really cool at the time. I now laugh at him. And then kind of a key thing about this issue, in my mind, it was like years between comics, but let me see. This was August of 71. I don't think what's its official date? Oh, its official date is, no, where'd it go? I'm having trouble. Its official date is November, but I'm pretty sure it was on sale in August, and it had to have been the summer in August when I got it. Which, interestingly, would have been literally the 10th anniversary of the beginning of Marvel Comics, because in 1961, Fantastic Four #1 came out, and now I've made that connection. So this was cover dated November, and then this was cover dated the next May. So basically 6 months apart. So 6 months later, I got my next comic book, at least the way I remember it. And my memory might be wrong. But so in my memory, this was my second comic. and it just, oh man, did I want more. And what was so painful about it was it ended on what to me was a staggeringly intense cliffhanger, with the appearance suddenly of this guy called the Stranger, who's the child buyer. He's kidnapping children off Earth with the help of Batroc, which makes Batroc pretty damn evil. But yeah, that was intense, and that was actually 20 years before I got to read the next issue. Didn't blow me away as much by then because I was a hardcore comic book reader by then, of course. But what that inspired me to do was to read the fine print, and somewhere here it tells you that you can subscribe. So I didn't respond to an ad, but I sent in my $3 for that included the king size special. I must have found the address. I guess the address is somewhere up here. Additional mailing office. So I did that, and I sent away for it. And so I had a subscription, my first subscription to Captain America and the Falcon. And the very first issue I got was September. So, wow. Would that take them another, I'm not doing math well in my head, another 4 months or so to get the next comic to me? But I'm pretty sure this was my first issue of my subscription. Again, kind of a mind-blowing issue where, wait a minute, there's a racist Captain America, or Captain America has become racist. Not only that, but Nick Fury and Captain America are fighting over a girl, and all kinds of other stuff. So it combines the silly and the serious. So anyway, that always kind of blows my mind looking back on it, the intensity of this stuff. So that is my official memory. Captain America went on, it became a 4-issue storyline, which to me was very intense, where Captain America ended up fighting Captain America. There was a crazy Captain America from the commie hunting 50s who'd gone insane. But then I know, I just don't slot it into my official memory, the first DC comic and the first Superman comic I got was this issue with an incredible Neil Adams cover. Neil Adams, again, played a big role in getting me into comics. This is Superman number 249, and it's the first appearance, dun dun dun, although I didn't know anything about first appearances and still don't really, of Terra Man. And inside, we got it was a big shock to go from the cover art to the interior art in this case. The Marvel comics I'd read up to this point almost always had the same artist on the cover as inside, or a very similar artist. But there was something fascinating about the Kurt Swan art and the Archie and Edith appearance. But I think I found, I don't know. I remember liking this, but also being disappointed in it. That was not like Marvel. But anyway, I thoroughly enjoyed the story, and but then did not get much Superman for a long time afterwards. But another interesting thing about this one is which I did not realize till many years later, it has, or maybe I did, it has the origin of Terra Man, and it's art by Dick Dillon and Neil Adams. Neil Adams is the inker on this. I don't know how often that kind of thing happened. Maybe a little more often than I realize. And it also, because this was the oversized period for DC, included a very old Superman reprint. And that sense, and they tell you where it came from 1947. So because I pored over these comics and every detail of them, I quickly realized that there was this long history of older stories and newer stories with the older stories had different art styles and a whole different vibe to them. So then in my memory, so this somehow is, okay, so there's the issue here I meant to say. This is from March of 1972. So did I get this one actually before what I believe to be my second comic. Was it just I just remembered my second Marvel comic? Or, you know, because both the newsstands were often, you know, not that consistent, maybe I actually found the Superman one well after finding the Captain America and the Falcon one, even though it's of officially of an earlier date. Or it's also possible because at some point along the line, I found a farm stand that my parents would go to, had a box of old comic books that you could buy for a nickel a piece, sitting at the side, sort of tucked under the table where the corn was. So I remember kind of trying to get my parents to let me stay a little longer to paw through that box longer. So I don't know where that came from, really. This, I believe, is my original copy because a bunch of things turned up in my in that box my mom sent me from the attic. This is going to be a long video, isn't it? So then in my official memory, this is the third comic I ever got. Although this copy is a signed by John Buscema copy that my wife bought me. And this was a big landmark for me because I finally got to read a Conan comic. And I, of course, loved it. There's Buscema's signature. Presumably it's a legitimate signature. My wife bought it off of eBay. And this was a very intense experience to me too. But the cover date of this, where do they put those cover dates, is April of 1972. But my memory is I bought it long after that May of 1972 comic. So I don't really know what's going on. But again, because of the weirdness of newsstands, in my memory, I bought this in an airport when we were on a long plane ride, and it's what kind of got me through the plane ride as a 10-year-old. So, and there's all kinds of, from a 10-year-old point of view, hints at adult life in a book like Conan, if that makes any sense. You know, the king and the queen, with the queen not being very happy with the king and being attracted to Conan and all that kind of stuff. And again, it was in the middle of a story to be continued and with references to what had come before, but it also felt like a kind of complete story. And I loved the John Buscema artwork. So that would have been I'd already experienced Sal Buscema, and that would be my first John Buscema comic. And I have many copies of that issue now. So then, I don't know where to place it. Here's a comic that I also remember as being an early kind of key comic that was exciting to me, with the Beast. I didn't yet really know about the X-Men, and I learned about the Beast, and my first experience with a really cool villain, the Juggernaut. And I loved this splash page and the art. But so this would have supposedly been cover date January 1972, which means it actually came out in 1971. So maybe I got this one even earlier, or again, maybe I picked it up after the fact, and I just don't remember. But this one had, is that Steve Englehart himself there? It had some of the Marvel bullpen in the comic, and it had that famous Rutland, Vermont comic book parade. So that was crazy. And again, you know, helped make all these things seem weirdly connected. The world of comics, when you think about it, diving into a kid, is such a deep pool of imaginative and crazy things. So anyway, I always remember that real fondly. And that, again, this is part of kind of the road to a comic book obsession. And then I remember this one very clearly. And I remember this on some kind of family getaway where we were staying at some really gloomy, damp cabin, which I, again, hated as a kid. And this comic book got me through that holiday. But this one is September 1972. So in my official memory, I wasn't getting very many comics at that point. But apparently, despite my parents saying comics were horrible, they let me get a few more than I thought they did. And this one has amazing art by Herb Trimpe. And again, you know, so many of the standard and not so standard aspects of fantasy were in comics, and my first experience of them, like the shrinking man kind of thing, were here, and it wonderfully illustrated by Herb Trimpe. So love that kind of thing. So all of these, you know, I went over the deep end, and at some point, and I just don't know when anymore, was just so obsessed with comics. I was drawing them myself. There's that video you can go back to where I show the old drawings from a little older than this period that I did, where I was constantly drawing comic book pages. And I was, you know, getting, eventually, at some point, I don't know when, getting a comic book buyer's guide and looking at every ad in those, even though I couldn't afford to buy very much. Okay, so then at some point, again, what are the cover dates? So at some point I discovered the Fourth World and Jack Kirby. I mean, I think I had seen some Jack Kirby reprints. This is June of 1972. So came out right around the same time as my supposed second comic with the Captain America. But I feel like I got this quite a bit later. And I also, at some point, but this is a January comic, and I couldn't find the original issue for this video, but I know I have it somewhere. New Gods #6, and that made an incredible impression on me. The Glory Boat just blew my mind, both the artwork and the story, and the sense of the deep science fiction story hidden behind all the events of this sort of one-off story in the middle of the war between Apocalypse and the New Gods. And the emotional intensity to me was almost limitless. was almost overwhelming, with the father-son conflict and the sense of war and the strange creatures and people making sacrifices. So yeah, that was a huge thing. How could I not be 100% obsessed by comics after reading that issue? I think that story alone has a huge impact on me still, you know, when I go to write stories or the kind of stories I'm attracted to. But I also remember Mr. Miracle as being incredibly intense. So I must have just found these at some point later on. I can't even remember. It seemed like that one little box at the farm stand wouldn't be enough. And it was probably, you know, 2 or 3 years after I discovered comics that I discovered there was a comic book store near my grandmother's apartment in New York City, the comic book store city, Super Snipe. But this vision of Apocalypse here, and Granny Goodness's camp, all these wild characters, you know, it was mind-blowing and mind-consuming, thought-consuming in a way for my very bored. We lived out in a sort of sleepy country town with no sidewalks, no stoplights. To visit a friend, though, that everyone was so far apart on kind of rural highway roads, you had to get your parents to drive you over to other kids' houses. I did have a brother and sister, but they seemed to have more in common with each other than with me, so I was kind of a lonely kid. And this is what kept me company. And it doesn't hurt that in the Marvel comics, the whole sort of Stan Lee persona, the making all the creators kind of your friends or acquaintances, you get a little window into their world. So, yeah. And then again, the reprints in the back of the Boy Commandos. I remember puzzling over this stuff. It really seemed alien to me. It's so of its time. And also, at some point, I got a hold of the first Commandy issue I ever read, I believe, because I I found when I got my comics from my mom, the ones that were in the attic, that I had some earlier issues of Commandy, but I have a strong memory that this is the first one I actually found. Number 12, December, with this ridiculous race on the giant grasshopper who only has 4 legs, not 6. And what's this? This is 1973. So yeah, maybe I got this off the racks because I then knew who Jack Kirby was, and then suddenly discovered, hey, he's got another comic. This one's strange. And I loved Planet of the Apes in theory. I had never seen it at the time, so because it was rated PG, and my parents would not let me see a PG movie. But this is beautiful art. What a way to keep things covered there with that book. But yeah, I became basically a lifelong Commandy fan starting with this issue. And obviously I eventually managed to find a bunch of other Commandy issues. Although only a few years ago did I finish my complete Commandy run. This is a very nice copy of it. This is not my original copy, I don't think. I think I haven't even unwrapped it yet. Here's my original copy. So in 1978, I put everything in these bags and stuck them in the attic and then forgot they were up there. And you might say, well, why did I forget about it if I'm such a comic book fanatic? Weird twists of memory. I sold, must have been half my collection to this dealer. And then I was upset afterwards thinking I had sold away my fortune in comics for too little money. Which I had. So I don't know where I got these bags or what kind of bags they are. I wrapped them up in them. They're all sort of melted together now from their years in that attic. But I don't, and then I spent 2 years not reading comics, or at least I thought I had, but it looks like I did read some comics during those 2 years. But I just put them out of my mind because I was upset about having sold off my fortune in comics. But at the same time, I must have at the time, and I've just forgotten, thought, well, these other ones might turn out to be valuable someday, so I'll wrap them all up in plastic. And in that same box, I found this Defenders number 6, which I think was my first issue of the Defenders. Again, I have not, it's very hard to unwrap these melted bags on them, but I have another beat up copy that I've bought more recently. What year is this? Is this 72 or 73? Look at that splash page. No wonder I was attracted to that. And more Sal Buscema, 1973. So, and I know that was the next comic once I discovered the Defenders that I subscribed to. And then I eventually subscribed to the Avengers and the Fantastic Four, which became my favorite comic, along with Conan, I think. And to Spider-Man and to the Hulk. And Defenders also increased that feeling of the Marvel Universe and its ability to cross over and everything be connected. So I think this was one of my subscription issues. I can recall that this was my first Marvel team-up. The idea of superheroes teaming up with each other for an 11-year-old boy was very exciting. And of course, the spooky Morbius was very exciting too. And I believe this has incredible Gil Kane art on the inside. And somewhere around that time, I subscribed to Foom. And I know somehow I knew who Jim Steranko was. So I was very excited that Foom was edited by Jim Steranko, and there are occasional bits of Jim Steranko Spider-Man inside these issues. So again, this and then the Buyer's Guide, which I haven't grabbed a copy of, just gave you an ever-deepening feeling of this connection in this complicated world. And so anyway, that was kind of Foom was an important step. I always loved this picture as a kid. Must be John Buscema. And also along the way, I became aware of like the comics that came out a few years before I started collecting, and I became most obsessed with those, and I was sure those were the best, especially the ones that would have 2 stories in them per issue. So occasionally I would find those. And you know, the amazing back catalog of Jack Kirby work at Marvel I became aware of. This became my favorite cover of all time, which I first learned about in like a Penguin History of Comic Books. They reproduced this cover. And there were a lot of reprints around at this time. Let's see, when was this? 1972. And I got a lot of these Marvel's Greatest, which gave me a good peek at the classic Fantastic Four by Lee and Kirby. And I also remember getting Marvel Triple Action, and what was the one with the Hulk in it? So I remember getting ones with the Hulk and the Avengers too that were older stuff. I'm not sure at what point I realized they were reprints. There was a bit of confusion with like the Fantastic Four doing different things in different places, in different comics. Love this Prester. I remember always loving this Prester John one. I also recall this one. Maybe I got a cluster of comics on a long plane ride that we took perhaps when my dad got a job in California, maybe. Prester John just really interested me. I don't know if he's turned up much in Marvel Comics since. Anyway. And another thing that really grabbed me was other kinds of way out science fiction things. This was like Conan meets science fiction in a way with Killraven in War of the Worlds. And this was my first issue of Killraven with Herb Trimpe turning up again. And shades of some of that Jack Kirby stuff here, the Glory Boat and stuff. It felt very intense and wild and exotic. Intense, wild, and exotic may describe the whole experience. And then I guess I knew enough. I started to know what was coming up. And I knew that Planet of the Apes and Savage Sword of Conan were coming out. And I asked my grandmother to get them for me at that comic book store in New York City. So just getting these black and white magazines was another step somehow in the intensity. And especially the Planet of the Apes just utterly fascinated me. And then seeing Mike Plug do his version of Planet of the Apes in this story about what was the story called? The overall story, Terror on the Planet of the Apes, the original story made up by Doug Munch. And I just, this became, along with Conan, drawing apes became a big part of what I imitated from comic books in my drawing. Yeah, that picture right there really jumps out at me. And then it's hard to put an order in things. This must have been an older issue So right around the time I turned 14, we spent a year in Switzerland. And I couldn't find very many comics in English. But I found this, The Spirit, even though this must have come out several years before that. This was the first issue of The Spirit I got. And it kind of broke open a whole new kind of away from the superheroes and any other kind of comic I'd read before kind of comic. And especially this very first episode, The Life Below, where the spirit goes down and finds all these sort of ne'er-do-well villains, criminals living in the gutters, in the sewers. But everything in here made a huge impression on me. And again, I didn't have much to do. I was in a new place, didn't have that many friends. I spent a long time studying this comic book. And it definitely, I sensed it being more, quote, literary, shall we say, or sophisticated. And it just, again, changed and deepened the comic book obsession and appreciation of it as an art form. I also remember being very obsessed by there's a color story in here. Where did it go? I just thought that was so intense. And it's a story that almost entirely takes place in an elevator. And it seemed so innovative and intense and clever, so I really dug that. And yes, there was this. For some reason, it just never occurred to me that as a kid, when I was reading that this was a racist depiction. But Ebony became one of my favorite characters despite that. I also loved Dolan. I love these Dolan shots, and I feel like Will Eisner really enjoyed drawing Dolan. So, yeah, I'm taking a lot of time. Another highlight, and one that I became obsessed with, was Deathlock the Demolisher. Spent a lot of time imitating Rick Buckler's drawings in this comic. It seemed super intense and exciting to me. So yeah, I now see that, I noticed it more in Buckler, but Herb Trimpe and Jim Steranko and Barry Smith all did this kind of sequential paneling too. Anyway, that was very cool. And another one that made a huge impression was discovering Paul Gulacy's Master of Kung Fu. And I had to get more and more of Master of Kung Fu, and I subscribed to that also. And at some point, just went to great lengths trying to find Master of Kung Fu comics. Again, it had all kinds of intensity of betrayals and father versus son and the concepts of honor and which concept of honor is correct. So it seemed very important to me at the time. Another interesting thing, and I was very excited at an actual new comic book company started, Atlas Comics. I did not know where they came from or what was going on there at the time, only later learned that it was kind of a revenge plot of Martin Goodman against the people who bought Marvel from him and then didn't, in his mind, keep their bargain going. But Grim Grey Ghost, Iron Jaw, somehow I managed to get a lot of these, and my beloved Rich Buckler on Demon Hunter, which I only learned far, far later only had one issue. I just assumed I'd missed some of the issues. And also, I, for some reason, wanted to give a special spot to Hercules Unbound, which is a comic book that helped get me through another kind of lonely time when I was 15. My parents sent me off to a boarding school, and I just did not fit in there very well. But I had a larger allowance than I normally did, and there was a 7-Eleven that I could walk to on Saturdays, and I would walk down there and pick comics off their spinner rack. And Hercules Unbound stands out to me as my exciting discovery on the spinner rack, and maybe this was my first experience with Wally Wood. He was just the inker on here, but he kind of dominated what the artwork looked like with his own style. So, yeah. And then I gave up comics to afford gasoline for my car so that I wouldn't embarrass myself in front of my fellow high schoolers, particularly girls, who I hoped to take out on dates, but never really had much success there. And it was only then in, again, my memory's wrong. I thought it was 1980, but I guess this comic is 1981, I believe. No, it is 1980. Okay. So in 1980, my freshman year of college, I discovered, although this may have come out my beginning of my sophomore year, but I remember it as my freshman year. But maybe in the beginning of my sophomore year, I discovered, just by chance, I found that there was a comic book store in downtown Ithaca, New York, where I was going to college. And I discovered there this Daredevil comic. And it was really good. And I don't think I equated it with the spirit, but I later realized that, yes, it was very much influenced by Will Eisner's spirit and some specific stories about, I think, Sans Serif was her name. I have to look into that. Ones which I had read many years before. Anyway, I loved it, and I kept going back and getting more Daredevil comics, and they were just good. Every issue was great after every other issue. So then I started being totally in love with comics again and buying everything I could at that comic book store. I had a part-time job that I think paid $3.65 an hour, and that allowed you to buy a lot of 50-cent comics. And so, Daredevil was a huge part in sort of bringing me back and solidifying that love of comics, both on the superhero, wild, imaginative level and the sort of fine art, literary level, if you will. And I discovered Teen Titans. This was my first issue of Teen Titans, and I remember specifically this issue of Teen Titans being the one where I was like, oh my God, I love this comic. I can't get enough. I need more comics. And at the same time, I believe, was when DC and Marvel were experimenting with direct to the comic shop comics, and one of the big standouts was Dreadstar, and really loved Dreadstar. And there was a bunch of other stuff I loved too, Kazar, and I don't know, but it made going to the comic book store extra exciting. And it seemed in my early 20s then, or 20, 21, 19, 20 and 21, like this secret world of just fantastic stuff that I rediscovered and realized really was as cool as I remembered, if not cooler. And I wanted to tell the whole world how incredible comics were, but no one was listening to me at the time. I forced several girlfriends to read comics, but didn't get very far with that. And another major thing at the time was you could get Warrior comics from England at the comic shop. This is, I know somewhere in my boxes or somewhere I have, issues 1 through 8, but this is issue 12, so it just kind of represents that. But there was, even more evidence of all the interesting things you could do with comics, hidden away, tucked away in these black and white pages, from the incredible Alan Moore, first discovery of Alan Moore, but a whole bunch of other artists and unusual story types. There's Prester John come back from the Fantastic Four to be a historical comic. And of course it had V is for Vendetta, and the Miracle Man stories, and Laser Eraser and Press Button. So there was just a lot to absorb there and to continue one's excitement into comics. So from there on in, that's kind of a little history. From there on in, I was hooked on comics forever. So that's just a little history of a very sloppy history. 41 minutes. Holy cow. How did I do that? 42 minutes, really. But thank you to Mark at 4 Color Commentary for providing the opportunity to take this approach this time. And I'll talk to you all again soon.